In the winter of 1942, the United States government did something it has never fully admitted to doing. It asked the mob for help. Not informally. Not through back channels that could be later denied. Through a documented arrangement negotiated in a federal prison in Dannemora, New York,
I had nothing to do
between
with
naval
it.
intelligence officers and the incarcerated
We know
Lucky
you were
Luciano,
there. That's a mistake.
with Meyer Lansky serving as the essential intermediary, the man who made the conversation possible and the agreement
All
stick.
set? Let's move.
The circumstance
Cart's
that
heavy,
produced this
but we're
arrangement
coming.
was not
Ramp's clear.
ideological.
Board now.
It was
We
operational.
advance along this line.
The United
Agreed, but
States
supply
had
lines are
entered the
vulnerable
war
here.
following
Then we
Pearl
flank from the
Harbor,
east. That
and the
secures the
eastern
position.
seaboard had become a
Which
critical
way to the
vulnerability.
bridge? Follow
German
this road, then
submarines were
left of the
operating
square.
in the Atlantic
Thank you.
with devastating effectiveness.
Good
in the
day,
first 6
gentlemen.
months of 1942
Welcome back,
alone,
sir.
German U-boats sank more than 300 ships in American coastal waters.
Operation
Cargo ships
Underworld.
were going down faster than they
Luciano's
could be
involvement is
replaced.
confirmed.
And the docks of New York, where the cargo moved, where the intelligence that might compromise shipping routes could be gathered and transmitted, were controlled not by the United States Navy, but by the International Longshoremen's Association.
Indicted for
The
conspiracy,
Longshoremen's
yet
Union
later
was a
commended by
Mafia
naval
institution.
intelligence. The
Every
complex
man on the
legacy of
waterfront
Charles
worked
Lucky
under an
Luciano.
arrangement that the New York
Gentlemen, I
organized
demand
crime families
answers.
had established through
What are you
decades
hiding
of
in those
labor
files?
racketeering.
That's
The
classified.
Navy could secure
We need
its
to
own
discuss
ship.
this matter
It could
carefully.
not secure the docks.
I understand.
And
What
it
do you propose?
understood, with
A
the
compromise
particular
is essential.
clarity
Let's
that wartime
proceed.
necessity provides, that securing the docks required the cooperation of the people who actually controlled them. Those people were not in the Navy. They reported, formally or informally, to Lucky Luciano. The approach to Luciano was made through his attorney, who brought in the one man who could serve as a credible bridge between the United States government and the imprisoned boss of the American underworld, Meyer Lansky. Lansky was, by 1942, already a figure of considerable significance in the organizational landscape of American organized crime. He had been present at the formation of the National Crime Syndicate. He managed financial operations across multiple cities and jurisdictions. He was trusted, which, in the context of this particular negotiation, was the most important qualification anyone could have brought to the table. Luciano trusted him. The Navy needed someone Luciano trusted. Lansky was the only person who was both. The prison in Dannemora was cold and the negotiations were careful. The men on both sides understood, without saying so directly, that they were engaged in something that would not appear in any press release and would be acknowledged in official documents only in the careful language of people describing something that required deniability. The arrangement that emerged was remarkable in its directness. Luciano would instruct the Union leadership on the New York waterfront to cooperate with naval intelligence. Dock workers would report suspicious activity. Strangers asking questions about cargo schedules, unfamiliar faces taking an interest in shipping manifests, anything that might indicate German intelligence gathering. The waterfront network that the mob had spent decades building as a criminal infrastructure would be turned, temporarily and selectively, into a wartime intelligence asset. In exchange, Luciano's prison conditions would be improved, and there was an understanding, not written, not formally acknowledged, but understood by everyone in the room, that his cooperation would be remembered when the war was over. Lansky served as the operational coordinator. He was the person who translated between the government's requirements and the organization's capabilities. He understood both languages, the institutional language of federal agencies and the operational language of criminal organizations, in ways that almost no one else in either world did. He moved between them with the ease of someone who had spent his entire career navigating the space between what the law said and what life required. The waterfront operation began almost immediately. Within weeks of the Dannemora negotiations, the organizational infrastructure of the New York waterfront had been quietly oriented toward intelligence gathering. Dock bosses who had spent their careers as criminal enforcers became, without any formal change in their status, the most effective counterintelligence network operating in the Port of New York. They knew every face on the waterfront. They knew which faces did not belong. They reported what they saw through channels that ultimately led to naval intelligence. There was something else Lansky understood about this negotiation that the naval intelligence officers may not have fully grasped. The government was giving him something that no criminal success could generate on its own. By coming to him, by acknowledging that they needed what he could provide, the government was giving him leverage. Not leverage he would use overtly. That was not his style. But leverage in the deeper sense. The knowledge, shared by both parties, that the relationship between the government and the man it had been trying to destroy was more complicated than either side's official position suggested. The Operation Underworld intelligence network extended beyond New York. As the Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Sicily in 1943, the question of what they would encounter on the ground became strategically critical. Sicily was not simply an Italian island. It was, in significant respects, a Sicilian island with organizational loyalties and power structures that traced their roots to the same criminal traditions that had produced Lucky Luciano. Luciano's Sicilian contacts, activated through the Underworld network, provided intelligence about local conditions, population loyalties, and the organizational structures that would affect the Allied advance. American soldiers moving through Sicilian towns reportedly encountered locals who produced yellow handkerchiefs, a signal, it was said, from Luciano himself, indicating safe passage and local cooperation. The precise nature and value of this intelligence has been debated by historians for decades. What is not debated is that the relationship existed, that Lansky was central to it, and that the United States government found it sufficiently useful to honor the understanding that had been reached in Dannemora. In 1946, Lucky Luciano was released from prison, his sentence commuted by Governor Thomas Dewey, the same prosecutor who had put him there, and deported to Italy. The official justification was his wartime cooperation. The unofficial understanding was that a deal had been made and the government was honoring it. Lansky had made the deal possible. He had served as the bridge at the moment when both sides needed the bridge badly enough to use it. The FBI's relationship to Operation Underworld was, from the beginning, profoundly uncomfortable. J. Edgar Hoover had spent years publicly denying the existence of a national crime syndicate. The Underworld operation, which required acknowledging not merely that the syndicate existed but that it controlled the waterfront, had organizational reach into a foreign country, and possessed intelligence assets the federal government found genuinely useful, was difficult to reconcile with that public position. Hoover was not involved in the operation. Naval intelligence ran it. The FBI was on the outside of an arrangement that should have been exactly the kind of organized crime intelligence gathering the Bureau should have been leading. The bureaucratic implications were deeply uncomfortable, and they contributed to a relationship between Hoover's FBI and the reality of organized crime that historians have been untangling for decades. There is a specific irony in the FBI's 4-decade pursuit of Meyer Lansky that the Operation Underworld context makes visible. The Bureau spent 40 years attempting to prosecute a man who had, in 1942, been deemed sufficiently trustworthy and sufficiently connected to serve as the intermediary in a negotiation involving the national security of the United States. The same qualities that made him valuable to naval intelligence. His reliability, his organizational reach, his ability to operate across institutional boundaries were the qualities that made him impossible to prosecute in peacetime. The FBI was trying to destroy a man who had, in effect, already been validated by the government it served. Operation Underworld ended with the war, but what it created between Lansky and the government did not end. It simply became unacknowledged. And Meyer Lansky went back to his business. The casinos, the financial architecture, the offshore accounts, the careful management of other people's money across jurisdictions designed to be unreachable. He carried with him the knowledge that the government, which would spend the next 4 decades trying to destroy him at once, in its moment of greatest need, asked him for help. And he had provided it. Reliably. Completely. Without making the government pay more than it had agreed to pay. That was, after all, what he did. He was the man everyone could trust to give them exactly what was agreed. Nothing more, nothing less. In 1942, the United States of America had been everyone, and it had needed Meyer Lansky. It was not immunity. It was not protection. It was the understanding that some relationships are too complicated to be resolved cleanly, and that the man at the center of those relationships, if he is patient enough and careful enough and honest enough about what he is and what he has done, can sometimes outlast the institutions that would otherwise consume him. He was patient. He was careful. He was honest in his way. He outlasted them all.